Hi, everyone. Welcome to End of Life Conversations and Reflections. Today, my guest is Patricia Spear. Patricia is originally from Montreal, where she obtained her degree in counseling and subsequently a degree in social work from McGill University. She moved to Vancouver in 1984, where she continued her work as a counselor, creating workshops on personal growth and helping counsel incarcerated youth. Patricia completed the palliative care certificate program from Langara College Continuing Studies in 2001. And for the last 20 years, she has been a volunteer at Vancouver General Hospital on the palliative care unit, where she supports patients on their end of life journey. Patricia also completed her Sacred Passage Death Doula certificate in 2018. She also recently became a certified yoga instructor and pre-COVID enjoyed teaching yoga to people with mental and health challenges. At present, Patricia is semi-retired and looking with curiosity at all the possibilities that will open up for her post-COVID. So thank you so much, Patricia, for making time out of your busy schedule to have this conversation about death and dying and I guess living.
So I'm
So
delighted to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation.
my pleasure. I really appreciate it because it's not an easy conversation to have, and I can't usually find people to have these conversations. So I really do appreciate it. I usually like to start out asking people about their first experience with death. When I ask you that question, what comes to mind and what memories brought up for you?
Uh, first, my first physical experience with death, not just reading about it or whatever, was an aunt of mine. Actually, two aunts. They died within 6 months of each other when I was 16. So, and the littlest one, who was 21 at the time, the other woman was 24. I was very close to her. She was like a big sister, like somebody I really felt I could look up to and, get information. So I was devastated when she died. And one of the side effects of that, I didn't cry at the funeral, but one of the side effects of that was, I realized years later, I went looking for her friends and was in search of anybody that knew her when she was alive.
Wow.
Yeah.
And why was that important for you?
I wanted to know that she had fun.
Oh,
I,
wow.
I wanted to know about her as a young woman.
Yes.
Um, more of the person of her, and I wanted to
Yes.
know that she was happy. And
Right.
one of the big lessons I got from that is she was 21 and she was the youngest, so she didn't want to leave home because she didn't want to abandon her elderly parents. And her elderly parents lived way beyond her years, and it taught me, do what you want to do in life.
Yeah.
People have their own journey and their own length of time. So
Yeah.
that was a big life lesson for me from her.
And how old were you at that time when she died?
16.
You were 16, sorry, and she was
21.
21. Okay.
The other side effect of that, by the way, was, it's coming back to me now, is I was convinced I was the next one to go, because there was a certain number of years between her sister and her, and then 6 months later it was that same year difference. So I figured I was preparing for leaving 6 months later, so I had that in my head.
Yeah, no, because I remember when I was young, when it came to death and dying, it also made me feel like, okay, this could happen to me.
Mm-hmm.
And then as I was growing up, I kind of forgot about that until recent years. But when I was younger and I'm like, this person's gone,
Yeah.
and what if I just vanish too, right? So yeah, I can leave that sort of imprint and fear in children, especially if family members are not open and having those conversations where your parents or your family members open about death and dying, or was that something that you didn't discuss?
That's something that happened to you. Of course, my grandmother was devastated. She lost two children within a year. But coming from a Catholic background, we do have the Mass and the wake, which people don't get to have these days. because of
Yeah.
COVID. So we had like, and you'd go and visit that, the person would be on exhibition, I think this would be the word, or like you could go and visit the body for at least 3 days, 3 or 4 days. So, and then there was a mass, and then there was the burial. So there was it really helped in meeting and being with people. And even if you weren't talking about death, it was usually joking and talking about the person's life or funny things that had happened, you know, and a few close members in tears.
You know, the rituals around death and dying are so important to help us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And to have that support with people that are going through the same experience
Right.
is so important. And I find that now with the pandemic that people don't have that. They don't have the opportunity to get together and share their sorrow and support each other on their grief journey. And I find that to be one of the hardest things that really kind of, yeah, it's hard to kind of explain what that stirs inside of me, because I feel like even within my culture, there's so many rituals that help you kind of process that grief, and you never feel like you're alone, even though yes, you've lost a loved one, but there's the community actually behind you to support you
Yes.
until you're ready to kind of then walk on that journey on your own. So yeah, it is a bit devastating now that you don't have those rituals.
To even get my head around, comprehend what that must be like.
Yeah, I can't either.
Because and for the nurses who are being beside them so closely and there for their last moments, because it's just never happened.
Yeah.
And it must feel so like maybe they're not really dead. Maybe something, there's got to be a place where you just don't believe it, because you haven't seen their body. We won't know for maybe years to come, but hopefully people will be able to have a voice to share what it's like for them not to be able to be with community when they lose someone they love.
Yeah, I think it's really important that the health care community and the government gets on that piece, because I feel like the ripple effect of that will be devastating for the people that have lost their loved ones.
Yeah.
I just can't imagine, but we'll know yours down the road, I think, like you said. And I know if it happened to me that grief on its own is a very difficult journey, but not having the ability to be there with your loved one in their last days, moments. I had a family member die of COVID-19, and my aunt was only able to see him for a few minutes. And so that broke my heart to pieces. And I cannot fathom what that would be like, and what the ongoing effects of that might be on her health and mental health.
Yeah. It's one of the, maybe it can open up a place where we really maybe break that fear of talking about death to our loved ones now, so that you get a chance to let them know how you feel about it or how you feel about them.
Yeah, and exactly during the pandemic is when I started having these conversations, because I thought, well, let's just normalize this, let's just have conversations about death and dying. What have you experienced? What are we afraid of? And what are the questions we still have? So yeah, I think we're having this conversation to hopefully dispel those fears for people, just in having a conversation, because you will often have people turn away or avoid you if you're having that conversation or trying to have that conversation. So yeah, and I also wanted to know, like, it sounds like that death of your aunt was quite profound, but as you were growing up, was there another person that you experienced this with that kind of resonates with you, or still
Sure.
kind of?
Both my parents died. So that was a different experience of kind of going through the place where you're an orphan. I mean, technically the people that knew you from birth are gone. And I would say those are the biggest ones.
Yeah. And so, like you said, there's a lot of different rituals that you would have engaged in back then. What about a personal process or personal thing that you do to take care of yourself during that grief journey? Like, do you remember what you did to help get through that? What helped you?
Well, I had brothers and sisters. So it was community, you know, because we shared growing up together. So we had, again, the stories, the memories. And an unusual thing was, and I again see this in retrospect, is my dad died, but for some reason, his phone machine didn't go. They didn't cancel his phone machine for a year. Like what company doesn't cut you off? So I used to dial the number every couple of months or whatever, or maybe a couple of weeks earlier on, and just hear his voice. And it was so, like, it was lovely. And at the same time, I thought, gee, it's like a direct speech. Like, who doesn't cut off the phone? And a year later, they cut it off. But
Wow.
yeah,
I wonder if that was divine intervention just helping you along on your grief journey.
yeah, it was certainly neat to hear.
Yeah. And that's why this piece of legacy and recording things, especially if you know you're going to be dying. I mean, we're all going to be dying, but if you knew that you had a terminal diagnosis, a life-threatening illness, then encouraging people to leave those things like, conversations that are taped, letters, whatever that might be, is really important because it just brings so much comfort to the people you leave behind.
Having worked in palliative care, I hadn't thought about it this way, but I really talk to my son and even my grandchildren. I talk about not necessarily death. With my son, I do. Just, this is what I'd like, or this is what I'm thinking, because it changes all the time too.
Okay.
And have him be part of that process, which he's willing to do. And with my grandkids, they're still little, but I always talk to them in this. If I don't say I miss you, I say I'm sending energy your way. So did you feel it? I check in with them. Did you feel when I was saying hi to you when you were, you're at school, I'm here? And they, of course, go, yes, grandmother, we feel it. So I'm just letting them know that there's another dimension, but I'll always be there. And they just have to think of me and they'll feel me. So that training's been going on since, I remember my little grandson when he was 4, he had lost his grandmother on the other side, had died, and he burst into tears and he said, I don't want you to die. And I just looked at him and I said, you know what I'm going to say, Charlie? I will be with you either way. You can find me in your heart. I can't promise you I won't die, but I can promise you I'll be with you.
On that note, what do you believe happens after we die?
Well, I think we go on. I think it's kind of like how I explain it to myself. There's 2 ways. In Catholicism, you go to heaven, but I moved out of that thought a long time ago. The way it's taught to us. So what I think happens when we die is akin to when you're in your mother's womb and you're fighting almost to stay in there because you don't think there's anything outside of it. I mean, you just don't know. You're in the womb. And then all of a sudden you pop out and it's a bigger womb. So I think of it that way. I don't know what it's like. I might think that there's nothing there, and I think it'll probably be a bigger dimension to hang out in, or there's nothing and I'm not going to care about it. So it could, either way, I can live life in a purposeful way with meaning, whether there's nothing or whether there's something.
I love that analogy of being in the womb and then being birthed. Like a child, like you said, they don't know where they're going. They're like, and then they're born into this dimension and maybe
gotta go down.
Sorry?
You've got this tunnel that you have to go down, and it's squishing you and squeezing you, and it must feel scary. And then you pop to something bigger.
Wow, I love that. Yeah. I'm going to try and think of that when I'm feeling at all any fear and anxiety around death and dying, because I do. Just because I have this conversation and I have this channel doesn't mean I don't have moments where I have fear and anxiety around it, especially when it comes to losing people I love.
Mhm.
And that on that note, what are your fears around death and dying?
The fears I have are mostly that I want to be, if it's painful, to be able to handle the pain or have the pain handled. I'm not big on the pain part of things.
Right.
But I also know, again, from years and years in palliative care, I've seen over and over again, or imagined or interpreted, there's something that opens up inside you when you're on that part of your journey that I don't think you have access to till you're on that part of the journey. And it's like a grace, or it's like a wisdom. It can be a clearing of a lot of fight in you, but it's kind of magical. But I don't pretend to know or know how to feel it. I just have watched it over the years.
Right. Have you ever had an interaction with someone in your experience that was just so like in that space where you say where you just there had grace and they that comes to mind for you, and then also the opposite where someone was fighting it, and how did that impact the people around them and their end of life journey?
So yeah, for sure, both spectrums. Or people that are fighting, and then a couple of weeks later you come and there's something different that's happened. It's usually a shift. Like I believe the definition of a miracle is a shift in perception. So I think something happens that allows maybe just the inevitability of it. Some people that are angry till the end, I sometimes wonder if it's because there's a demand put on them to not die. That's a hard one. It's like being told you need to try harder, you need to pray harder, you need to not give up, when they just want to give up. But it's not giving up, like death is not a failure, it's a process. It's what we go through. If you don't know how to respect it, then you're going to demand that it happen a certain way. That could be all the myths you need to clear that you've been taught. You got to fight to the end. I remember this one old guy, and he was in a lot of pain. And he had been a soldier, and he was saying, I got to get through this. I've got to get through this. I said, nobody's looking. There's nothing that you have to hold on to. You can allow a more comfortable way to get through this. And he just kind of swore at me, and then he smiled, and then he took the medication. So that was a shift in perception. The other thing is that you stay a person till the end. That's the biggest thing too that I've learned. You're not a dying, you're a person that's happening to be dying. But a lot of times that gets lost, and you become a dying person rather than a person first, you and everybody that people know, and the people that stay with you as a person that's going through this process.
Love that too. Amazing. And so what do you hope happens after we die? So you mentioned that. So what do you hope for your end of life journey? I guess that's what I would want to know. Like if you were to
Scenarios, I'd like to die really quickly. And
that's
so
what I wish a lot of people have. Like when you're saying that, are you saying like I'd like to die in my sleep, or are you trying to say that?
Yes, it could be in my sleep. It could be just whatever, fast. That's why I think I have the conversations with my people that are near me.
Yeah.
When things change, I'll go, oh yeah, I've decided this, or I'm thinking about that. Or this came up around dying, so that they'll know that I'm okay with dying in my sleep. Do you know what I mean? And the other way is, I like to think of it as lasting for a month, where I can bring everybody in and give them my directions.
Love it. Wow.
Like on stage.
Yeah. I think,
Like
when you're dying, that's the time to really get people, like you said, give them direction. That's the ideal time, because no one's going to say no, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So
I
one
know.
did I go like this, the other one is I'm on stage for a month, and they have to listen to everything I have to say.
You know, I've played that scenario out in my head too, like very, very often. And I'm like, I'd like a little bit of time. And that's exactly it, to just make sure that I've expressed and said and given and done.
Yeah.
But I think the best case scenario would be that you've done all that and you live your
Yeah.
life in such a way that if you were to die tomorrow,
Yeah.
that it doesn't matter because everything has been said and done, you know? And if we live our lives that way, then there are no regrets. And I've been recently reading this book, The 5 Regrets of the Dying, and the dying people that have been dying on the dying journey, end of life journey, they have expressed so many regrets. And I guess that's teaching me that, okay, well, if I don't want to have this regret and this regret and this regret, then I better do something about it while I can.
Some of the regrets that stood out for you.
I wish I had not worked so hard.
Not work so hard.
I wish I had been true to myself,
Mm-hmm.
you know, not what society wants me to be and do. I wish I had spent more time with my family and friends.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so those are, and you know, like one of the examples is like a woman waiting for her husband to retire so that she could do what she wants to do, which is travel.
Yeah.
And she's been begging her husband, who's quite successful, to please retire, but he loves his work so much that he keeps extending the retirement. And
Right.
his wife keeps waiting. They've had kids, you know, the kids are grown, they have grandchildren. And the wife is patiently waiting and waiting and waiting. And then he says, okay, she keeps asking him every year, is this the year you're going to retire? And he finally says, okay, this year I'm retiring.
Right.
And he starts the, you know, the process of his retirement. So, you know, putting his affairs in order and all that stuff with work. And before he retires, she's diagnosed with a terminal illness and dies.
Mm.
And so he's living with this regret that why was it necessary for me to do all this and not spend that time with my loved one and do the things that were important to her? And so, yeah, and so that you can't change that, right?
No.
You can't change that. There's nothing you do about it, but that's the guilt and the regret that that man was dealing with. And I'm like, wow, yeah, lots of lessons to be learned
Right.
from that. Yeah. Um, so the other question I wanted to ask you was, when you die, what do you hope people say about you?
I don't know. I don't think I think about what they would say about me, but I think what I would like, if when I die, I think I would like them to identify that the voice inside them when they call on me is a voice that's always kind, and that they know that I love them. And it's a kind thing. It's not, if the voice is nattering on, that they've got the tools to say that's my head, it's not the voice, because the voice is going to be kind and loving. So, you know, it's they're very well versed in the fact that love is what works. So if you don't feel that it's in a loving space, you just haven't figured everything out yet. But that's the goal, is to feel that loving. What they say about me, I don't think it's going to bother me too much either way. They can,
Sounds like you want them to feel a certain way when they think about you.
loved,
Yeah, that's
seen,
important.
and
Words
seen.
don't matter, right? The words don't actually matter. What people say about you, for example, after someone dies, people show up and say all these wonderful things. Does it matter that they've
Yeah.
come to your funeral, but they haven't stayed in touch with you for years? No, it doesn't.
I have thought that that'd be a cool party to have, though, where you have your funeral before, so you do hear those nice things, like they have a chance to say them. I think that
Wake. I would
doing
love
it.
to have a living wake. I would love
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, the
I think,
idea that you can have a send off,
yes,
a send off, which I think I would love to have that if I were to know that I had a certain timeline and I could do that, then what better way to receive love?
there have been patients that have done that at PCU over the years.
Oh yeah,
That's been done, yeah,
beautiful.
along with marriages.
Yeah, wow. What else comes up for you about this topic before we end today?
I think it would be an appreciation for the grief that does present itself, because we tend to want to jam that, like you have 6 weeks or whatever, then you're on a medication. It can take a very long time. And I've come to see grief as something that deepens and expands my life. It doesn't crush it, doesn't make it worse. It doesn't make it small. If I give it the platform of honor, just like, all emotions, they have their pluses and negatives, but they're not bad. They're what we get to, how we live our lives. We learn holding on to hatred isn't good for us. It doesn't feel good, but we have to learn that, or unlearn. I use the word unlearning. So there's a benefit of these experiences, and grief, which everyone is going to do differently because we're different people, like joy is different. So to just see it as keys on a piano, and in all different tunes. You don't want to just have one. Just let it play out, bump up against it. I think a lot of us are getting a little bit more available to that with COVID. So there's been a lot of letting go, whether it doesn't have to be people, it can be your job, your favorite yoga place is gone, or all these things.
Yes, it's all been about letting go, hasn't it?
Yeah, letting go from the beginning.
Well, I really appreciate you taking this time to have this conversation with me. I hope that you can come back again and we can do this again sometime.
All right, sweetie. Well, thank you very much. It's been great.
My pleasure.
Bye.
Thank you.